Mhm. So everyone, please adjust your motivation appropriately, and we will start with Refuge, Bodhicitta, and Kantalagema. Okay, so we are discussing the direct perceivers, and we have said that we have a fourfold classification. The sense direct perceivers is the first one, which we have explained. We have completed that subject. The second one is mental direct perceivers, which we are currently discussing. And then after this, we have self-knowers that are direct perceivers, and we have yogic direct perceivers. Okay, so the self-knowing direct perceivers and the yogic direct perceivers are included in this enumeration and are actually explained in this particular text. So we saw that when we were talking about mental direct perceivers, we were presented with a twofold classification. Mental direct perceivers presented or mentioned in this occasion, and those who are not mentioned in this occasion. And we say that, strictly speaking, mental direct perceivers mentioned in or indicated in this occasion refer to mental direct perceivers perceiving according to what the sense direct perceiver is perceiving, right? Because we have, for example, I sense awareness apprehending form, which is a sense direct perceiver. And then you can have a mental direct perceiver that comes from this sense direct perceiver apprehending form, apprehending sound, apprehending smell, apprehending taste, apprehending tactile objects, isn't it? Okay, so strictly speaking, mental direct perceivers indicated in this occasion refer to those who are related to the sense direct perceivers. However, you could say that also the self-knowing direct perceivers and the yogic direct perceivers are also they also fall in this category of what is indicated in this occasion, because later on in the text, they are explained. And that leaves us with mental direct perceivers that are not indicated in this context, in this occasion. And we say that this refers to, you can find a mention of this, like, such as, for example, mental direct perceiver knowing other people's minds, or the 5 types of higher perception, clairvoyance, and so forth. So what do we have in this category? As we say, we have things like knowing other people's minds, or the different types of higher perception. Also, we have the path of cessation, the path of seeing, the path of no more learning, the omniscience, and so forth. So these are mental direct perceivers not indicated in this occasion. They are not really discussed in the Lorig. You will find them discussed in other texts, such as, for example, parting. In the perfection, when you do perfection of wisdom, this is where omniscience and path of seeing, path of cessation, and all of those things are discussed. Okay, so at present, we are still doing mental direct perceivers indicated in this context, in this occasion. Okay, so here, when we talk about mental direct perceivers, we're talking about mental direct perceivers that are generated and exist in the continuum of an ordinary being. And this is why we link them, or we say that they are related to what sense direct perceivers are generated, right? So we take as the basis what the sense direct perceiver is apprehending. So you can have sense direct perceiver apprehending form or apprehending sound and so forth. And then in relation to what your senses apprehend, you will generate a mental direct perceiver, isn't it? So it has to do with how the mind of an ordinary being operates. We have explained that there are different assertions in terms of how they're generated, and we have talked about three different ways of production. The first one is alternating, where we say we have this alternation between one moment of sense direct perceiver, followed by one moment of mental direct perceiver, and then again sense direct perceiver, then mental direct perceiver, sense direct, like this. So it is as if you are slicing the moments of sense direct perceiver, and in between you are inserting mental direct perceivers. So this is alternating production. Then we have the second mode of production, which is production of three things simultaneously. We had the second moment of sense direct perceiver, the first moment of mental direct perceiver, and the self-knower that knows those two. So that was three things generated together. And then we had the third mode of production, which is a production of a mental direct perceiver only at the end of the continuum of uninterrupted moments of sense direct perceiver. So let's say you have 5 moments of uninterrupted moments of sense direct perceiver, and then when we come at the end of this continuum of 5 moments, you will have the first moment, or you will have the generation of the mental direct perceiver. Okay, so there was something that we said that from those 3 modes of production, the third one, which is production only at the end of the continuum, this is the position of our system, and we say that Lama Tsongkhapa and Kedrup Je accept this. Now, okay, now there is different ways that you can express this. So when we say that Lama Tsongkhapa and Kedrup Je, this is the assertion of these two, there is the, let's say, the innermost assertion, and there is the assertion. Okay, so the general assertion is that we understand from that the different schools all the way up to the middle way autonomy have the idea that at the very end of the continuum of sense direct perceiver, you generate mental direct perceiver. So Lama Tsongkhapa and Kedrup Je, understanding that all the other schools below the consequent school have this position, they also accept this. Okay, so this is you could say the general assertion. However, the innermost assertion of Lama Tsongkhapa and Kedrup Je has to be according to the middle way consequent school. And for the middle way consequent school, at the end of this uninterrupted continuum of, let's say, 5 moments of sense direct perceiver perceiving forms, you don't necessarily have to generate mental awareness, mental direct perceiver. What you generate is recollection, or the thought. So the recollection that says, I saw such and such a thing, all right? So not necessarily generating mental direct perceiver, but generating memory. The recollection is the inner thought, the inner assertion of Lama Tsongkhapa and Kedrup Je. So the thing is, as we say, that the innermost assertion of Lama Tsongkhapa and Kedrup Je has to be in accordance with the middle way consequent school. And as we say, the middle way consequent school really says, if you look at your own experience, what happens is that you have a memory, you experience something, you have a direct sense perception of something. Let's say, I clearly saw this, or I clearly heard that, okay? And once you have that direct sense experience, after that comes the memories. It's almost, you close your eyes and you think about it and you say, oh, what did just happen? You say, oh, I saw this, I heard that. So from experience, we know that what comes after the direct sense perception is memory, is recollection of that. it doesn't seem to appear that we have generation of mental direct perception. Okay, so this is the actual position of the middle way consequent school, that you have memory, okay, which is different from direct mental perception. Okay, however, the reason that we say that the third assertion is the assertion of our system as well, is because we do have this presentation. This presentation is explained. This is how all the other schools say that mental direct perception is generated. So it is explained, the explanation is incorporated in our presentation. Okay, so if actually you're following the book version, on page number 7, you will see that there is a discussion about these 3 modes of production. So we have said that the first one is alternating production. Alternating production was set forth. Okay, so now here we have the actual Sanskrit name of the scholar. Last week, I gave you sort of like the Tibetan translation of those names. So this is, the scholar was Prajnakaragupta. Okay, so this assertion is said to come from Prajnakaragupta. However, there are some who said that, we translated texts of Prajnakaragupta into Tibetan, plus commentaries of this original text and so forth. And nowhere in those texts and commentaries there is any clear presentation of this alternating production. So maybe this is not at all a position that was put forward by Prajnakaragupta. However, Kedrup Rinpoche, in one of his texts, addresses this doubt, this point. Okay, so as you can see, Kedrup Rinpoche also raises this point, and he says, from all the texts of this scholar, Indian scholar, that we have translated in Tibetan, we haven't found in any of those translated texts reference in this alternating mode of production. And therefore, Kedrup Rinpoche and others, they say, it appears that this is just like a hearsay. It's not something that is actually established or documented, because as far as we can see from the text that we have translated in Tibetan, there is no reference to this. So obviously the question remains that this Prajnakaragupta, was a great scholar in India. He has composed a lot of texts. So those who examine those texts in Indian, like in the original Sanskrit, whatever the original language they were written, they might come across a passage, a section that talks about alternating production. If such a passage is found, is identified in the Indian writings of this Pandita, then we can say, oh, okay, it does not exist in whatever texts were translated in Tibetan. However, it exists in the original Indian. But so far, all the scholars who have examined have not identified such a passage. Okay, so that statement that Kedrup Rinpoche and others have raised, that this is just hearsay and it is not actually proven that this is this scholar's position, so far it stands. If the passage is discovered in the original Indian text, then we can say, oh, okay, it is actually his position. So far, it has not been established. So, there is this discussion here whether this alternating mode of production is actually a valid mode of production. Because what happens is that when we see how sense direct perception is generated, usually we have a continuum of uninterrupted moments. It could be 5 moments, 6 moments, up to 100 moments of sense direct perception, all right? But so usually we have a continuum of uninterrupted. It might be short, it might be longer, but it's a continuum of uninterrupted moments of sense direct perceiver. But what this method here advocates is that you have the first moment, and then you have the second moment, but between the first and the second moment of sense direct perceiver, you have to insert a mental direct perceiver. But if you keep inserting a moment of mental direct perceiver, it means you don't have uninterrupted continuum. The continuum of the sense direct perceiver is constantly interrupted. Okay, so this is a fault that is attributed to this particular theory or this position. This is, if you accept alternating production, it means you will never have uninterrupted continuum of sense perception. You will never be able to posit this. And there is a second issue, which is again a very important issue with this theory of alternating production. Okay, so we say we're going to have the first moment of sense direct perceiver, and then after that, we will have the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth moment, isn't it? Okay, but if you have alternating production, it means that if you're looking at those later moments, the second, third, fourth, fifth moment, and beyond, we would be missing their substantial cause. Okay, because what comes if we had alternating production, what comes directly before the second moment of sense direct perceiver has to be mental direct perceiver. And before the mental direct perceiver would come the first moment of sense direct perceiver. Okay, so the problem is that whatever comes directly before the second moment of sense perception would have to be mental perception. So that means that mental perception would have to become the substantial cause of sense perception. But this never happens. Sense direct perception does not become the substantial cause for mental direct perception. And mental direct perception never becomes the substantial cause for sense direct perception. Okay, so if you keep inserting a moment of mental direct perception prior to each sense direct perception, then that sense direct perception does not have a substantial cause. So how do you generate it? Okay, so for that reason, we say that this theory of alternating production doesn't make sense. It is not something that we can accept. So there is this criticism for this theory of alternating production, that actually it has this great mistake within it, because in general, we know that the sense direct perceiver cannot change its nature and become mental. Also, the mental direct perceiver cannot change the nature and become sense direct perceiver. But if you tell me that immediately before the second moment of sense direct perceiver, what I have is mental direct perceiver, it means that this mental direct perceiver has now become to act as the direct substantial cause generating the next moment, which means the mental has to change its nature and become sense direct perceiver, which doesn't happen. So that is a big mistake. Okay, so you can see that actually we have a few issues with this theory of alternating production. You could say that perhaps the first issue that we raised, that in all the texts and commentaries that were translated in Tibetan, we have not found this passage. So where is this passage? Who said it? You know, this author, we don't find anything. Maybe you could say that this is not a big fault because it's something perhaps yet to be proven. We are still examining the texts existent in Indian literature and so forth. Okay, maybe this is not 100% a fault, but the other two are important faults. The second fault that we identify, or maybe the first, depending how you enumerate them, is that we would never have an uninterrupted continuum if we keep interrupting with this alternating production. And the second fault, or the third fault, is that we would not be able to identify a substantial cause for the second, third, fourth, and fifth, and so forth moment of that sense direct perceiver. Okay, then we come to the second mode of production, which is production in three types. It is called production in three types because first we have generation of sense direct perceiver, followed by mental direct perceiver, and at the same time we have self-knower who experiences these two together. So this is why it is called production of three types. Again, Kedrup raises the issue and says, again, we have a problem because this is supposed to be a position that was put forward by Brahmin Shankarananda. Okay, so this was something that was, talked about in Tibet, in the early Tibetan scholars. So there is this expression, they talk about the early Tibetan scholars or the earlier generation of Tibetans, and this refers to those who were prior to Lama Tsongkhapa. Okay, so early means earlier, prior to Lama Tsongkhapa. So Kedrup says, okay, prior to Lama Tsongkhapa, there are all those scholars in Tibet who were discussing that there is this Indian scholar, the Brahmin Shankara, and he propagates, or he talks about this mode of production in three times. But again, we don't find it in any texts in Tibet. Okay, the other issue that Kedrup brings up is even the term that we're using for this type of production appears to be wrong. It is called production of three types. And the question is, why are you calling this method three types? And the answer is because we have three things generated. One is sense direct perceiver, then you have a mental direct perceiver, and then you have self-knower. And Kedrup says, well, it's actually, they're not three things, they are four, because you have the sense direct perceiver, and then you have self-knower that is aware of the sense direct perceiver, then you have mental direct perceiver, and then you have the sense knower that knows the mental direct perceiver. So you have four, you don't have three. Okay, so this is the objection that Kedrup arises. It's like, why do you call it three? You should call it four, production by four types. But there is a response from the other side, and it says, I call it production of three types because the sense direct perceiver and the mental direct perceiver are actually observing external objects, right? Apprehending external objects. However, sense direct perceiver is different because it is facing inwards. Facing inwards here, it means is the one that apprehends awareness, right? It's not apprehending external objects such as forms and sounds and so forth. It's apprehending another type of consciousness, another type of awareness. So he says, I have three, and this is why I call it production by the three types. And then again, Kedrup says, oh, well, then you should say you have production of only two. Okay, why? Because you say, I don't need to have four, there are only three, because the two types of self-knower is it's only looking internally. Okay, only looking internally. So this is one time. But then why do you differentiate the other two, the sense direct perceiver and the mental direct perceiver? Because they are only looking externally. So just group them together And you have one type that is looking outwards and one type that is looking inwards. So he says, then there should be two, production of two. So you can see here there is some criticism, and it appears to be criticism, first of all, in terms of the terminology. How are you going to talk? How are you going to describe this type of production? Is it by 3 types or 4 types or 2 types? However, it goes deeper than just the label of this particular method, because they describe this mode of production as being a mode of production where 3 things are generated together. So they say you have the sense direct perceiver, and together with that, you have mental direct perceiver, and together with these 2, you have the self-knower who understands or cognizes these 2 together. But this doesn't happen this way. For ordinary beings, the time that we generate sense direct perceiver, at the same time we don't generate a mental direct perceiver. It can happen later, but it doesn't happen at the same time. And therefore, when you have self-knowing awareness, also the self-knowing awareness will happen at different times. If you're at the time where you're generating sense direct perceiver, you will have self-knower that knows this self-direct perceiver. And then later, when you generate the mental direct perceiver, you will have another self-knowing awareness, self-knower, that knows the mental direct perceiver. But the theory says that you have one self-knower that comprehends simultaneously at the same time the sense and the mental direct perceiver, which is not happening. It could not happen. Okay, so this is the fault. Okay, so you can see here that we have criticized and found fault in the first position and say alternating production doesn't make sense. Then we find faults in the second position, production of 3 types, and we say, again, that doesn't make sense. So if we keep criticizing and rejecting positions, obviously, our opponent will say at the end, you criticize this, you reject that. So at the end, what is your position? And we say our position is that there is production only at the end of a continuum. And even the term only at the end of the continuum is actually a term that indicates that we reject the other 2 positions, because we say you must have a continuum of sense direct perception. Let's say you have 5 moments. This continuum must be uninterrupted continuum. And as you come at the final 5th moment, okay, right at that moment, and only at that moment, you generate mental direct perceiver. So only at the end, it means you're not interrupting this continuum, because the other 2 methods in the alternating and the 3 modes, you're interrupting, right? You're intersecting that continuum of sense perception. So we say no, only at the end is produced. So mental direct perceiver is produced only at the end, just at the end of that continuum. Okay, so as you can see here, we have explained the mode of production of mental direct perceiver. Does that mean that we know how every type of mental direct perceiver is generated? No, we only know the mode of production of mental direct perceivers indicated in this occasion, which are, for example, mental direct perceiver, apprehending form, apprehending sound, and so on and so forth. And these are only mental direct perceivers generated in the mind stream of an ordinary being. It means we don't know yet about the mode of production of the self-knowers. We don't know yet of the mode of production of yogic direct perception. These are still mental direct perceivers, but we don't know yet how they are produced. Also, other things we don't know is how the different types of clairvoyance are produced. We don't know about the path of seeing, the path of meditation, the path of no more learning, omniscience. How are these produced? Because all those things are mental direct perceivers. So these things are actually produced not automatically, but they are produced through the power of meditation. You have to meditate in order to produce those things. Those things are not explained here so far. Okay, so what we have been talking about is this mental direct perceiver that is explained in this occasion, which is a type of mental direct perceiver generated automatically after you have the sense direct perceiver, isn't it? Okay, so, but the thing is that immediately after the sense direct perceiver, what we have is memory. We have recollection. However, we are not aware of how this mental direct perceiver is generated. We know about the memory, but we don't know about this one. Okay, so, all right, so our position is that we know from our experience, right, that when we have direct sense perception, after that we have a memory that says, I saw this, I heard this. But it doesn't seem to our mind, it doesn't appear that we have mental direct perception. So we ask those who say there is mental direct perception generated at the end of sense direct perception, say, why? Why do you say there is? Because in my experience, I don't have anything arising in my mind as a mental direct perception. And they say it exists, but actually it appears for such a short duration of time that it's very hard for the mind to apprehend it. Like it's just like it comes and goes so fast that you're not even aware that you have it. And they say it is one of those things that appears to the mind for the smallest limit of time. Okay, so let's talk about limit of time here. So when we talk about duration, there is the duration for the completion of an activity, and there is the smallest duration of time, the smallest limit of time. The duration for the completion of an activity can be months and years, depending how big the activity or the project is. So we don't have a problem with that. That we can understand. Okay, so the other thing is, what is the smallest limit of time? And they say, okay, the smallest limit of time. Imagine that you have a healthy adult, and that person snaps their fingers, okay? And the reason why they say a healthy adult is because if you have a very old person, it might take them a long time to do this. Or if you have a small child, they don't know how to snap their fingers. They try, it might take a while to do it. However, an adult, a healthy individual can just perform this activity. Okay, so to do this, you can do it very quickly. So he says, take the time that it took you to snap the fingers. Now divide this into 35 sections, and now take one out of those 35 sections. So this is how we define the smallest duration of time, 1/35 of the time that it takes a healthy adult to snap the fingers. Okay, so they say because mental direct perception appears into the mind for that very, very small duration of time, it is there, but it doesn't register. It comes and goes very quickly. Okay, so when we ask, is that something that you can establish logically with reasoning and so forth? They say no, because it is an extremely hidden phenomenon. Okay, we haven't discussed hidden phenomena yet. They will come later on. Okay, so we're talking about the smallest limit of time, and we say that it is defined as the 1/35th section of the time that it takes to snap the fingers to complete this particular activity. All right. So this is actually the assertion of the autonomy school and below, because the consequent school says, no, it's not 1 out of 35, it is 1 out of 165. So as you can see here, they define the smallest duration of time, or the smallest measure of time, as something which is now much shorter, much smaller. And it is for this reason that we say it is very difficult to realize impermanence, isn't it? To realize impermanence, you have to realize that, let's say, the vase or whatever is the object disintegrates moment by moment. It disintegrates, it changes momentarily. And that momentarily refers to that extremely small duration of time. And our mind is not capable of perceiving that there is change, that it doesn't remain unchanging in that extremely tiny, small duration of time. We can perceive change in a bigger duration, in a bigger scale of time. You say, yeah, of course, I can see like the environment changes, the house becomes old, the house collapses. Like I can see change. I can see the vase kind of chipping away, fading away, breaking. All right. So in a large scale of time, I can perceive change. However, when the limit of time becomes so small, it is imperceivable for us. We cannot see it. And this is why we do not realize impermanence, isn't it? And we say, but why? Why? I can see that things change, but why don't I realize impermanence? And then our teachers, the lamas, say, oh, because impermanence is very subtle. It's very subtle because you're dealing with that extremely short duration of time. You have to see change in that small duration of time. So we're asked the question, what is the vase? And you say, oh yeah, the vase is impermanent. But that doesn't mean we have realized the impermanence of the vase. To realize the impermanence of the vase, your mind has to be able to see what happens in that duration of time, which is the 1 out of 165 of the time that it takes to snap the fingers. So it is extremely subtle. So you see here, we are discussing how we have a problem even recognizing that there is mental direct perceiver arising in the mind. And, the schools below the autonomy, they say, oh, it's because you cannot perceive it arising in your mind for a duration of time, which is the 1 out of 36 moments of the time that it takes to complete that activity of snapping the finger. If we cannot recognize this, how are we going to recognize change that happens in the time that endures only for 1 out of 136 or 135, whatever is the number, is so small. And this is why we do not realize impermanence. So how are we ever going to realize impermanence? Well, it only happens with developing familiarity. So it takes a lot of thinking. It takes a lot of analyzing. So if you want to meditate on the impermanence of the vase, if you're just sitting there and you bring into your mind the image of the vase, if you're just thinking vase, this is actually very static. This is not changing. This is not going to lead you to realizing the impermanence of the vase. So you are not going to, placement meditation is not what will help you here. You have to do analytical meditation. And it's the same thing with emptiness. To realize emptiness, as it is to realize impermanence, you have to do a lot of analytical meditation. After the analysis, you can do placement, but you have to keep alternating analysis with placement. Only in this way, you can generate this realization. So at the moment, all we can perceive in terms of impermanence is impermanence on a very gross level. Oh, the house is getting old, right? Or the person died. This is like the grossest example of impermanence. So we have a lot of work to do in order to refine this. So in order to refine this, what we have to do is we have to increase the capacity of the mind. And how do we increase the capacity of the mind? We increase it through familiarity. We increase it through training. And this is something that we mentioned at the very beginning when we gave the definition of awareness. Awareness is that which is clear and knowing. And we say, if you train it, it will become better. If you neglect it, if you don't train it, it will go downhill. So it will become even weaker. Okay, so it takes a lot of training to realize impermanence. Okay, so today we talked a lot about those 3 ways of generating mental direct perceivers indicated in this occasion. Obviously, we don't have the realization, we don't have the experience, but at least the Geshe was saying, do you understand this presentation of these 3 modes of production? Okay, so as we all know, we have 5 types of sense direct perceiver. And because we have these 5 types of sense direct perceiver, after that, we generate mental direct perceiver. So we have mental direct perceiver apprehending form, apprehending sound, and so on and so forth. But how is this generated? If someone were to ask you, if someone were to say there is alternating production, alternating generation, immediately we will say, no, this is not something that I can accept because there is this and this and this fault. We have explained the faults that come from this position. If someone were to say, okay, if it's not alternating production, maybe we have production in 3 ways. Again, we have many objections here because we say, first of all, we don't agree with the name that you give into this type of production. There should either be production of 2 types, or there should be production of 4 types, for the reason that at the moment that I have sense direct perception, at the same moment, I do not have mental direct perception. And whilst I'm having mental direct perception, I do not have sense direct perception. So how could I possibly have a self-knower, a single self-knower that is aware of both mental and sense direct perception if these 2 are not generated or do not occur at the same time? And if I accept any of these 2 positions, it seems that it is impossible to get an uninterrupted continuum of sense direct perception. I cannot even get 5 minutes, 5 instances, 5 moments of sense direct perception happening. It seems I keep to have interrupting them. And if I do this, I lose the substantial cause of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th moment of sense direct perception. And then I would have to accept that mental direct perception changes its nature and becomes the substantial cause for establishing self-direct perception. So, therefore, I reject these 2 types of production. Okay, so then the other person would say, okay, you reject this, you reject that. So at the end, what is your position? I always say, okay, my position is that there is generation of mental direct perceiver only at the end of the continuum. But then the question arises, okay, you tell me there is mental direct perceiver generated at the end of the continuum, but where is it? Because from our experience, we cannot identify it. And we say, okay, it is generated, but we're not aware of this experience because it lasts for an extremely short duration of time. So it lasts for 1 out of 36 of the amount of time that it takes an able adult person to snap their fingers. Okay, so we say it is generated, but there is a condition, and the condition here is that the time is so minute, so short. So due to this condition of the time, of the short duration, we are not aware of it. We don't have the experience of it. So it is something which is a very hidden phenomenon for us. Okay, so as we say here, we were talking about mental direct perception, and this whole conversation, if you want, comes from the text, and there is, I was just trying to find this section. I got a little bit distracted with the mental direct perception. It says we have mental direct perceivers. When they are divided, there are two, those that are and those that are not indicated in this occasion. So those who are indicated in this occasion, it's on page 54. It says, the sutra says, consciousness of forms are of two types, those depending on the I and those depending on the mind. Okay, so those depending on the I obviously refers to sense consciousness, right? However, and those depending on the mind refers to mental consciousness. However, we, according to the middle way consequent school, we have to be a little bit more careful with how we express this, because when we say this, the one depending on the I and the one depending on the mind, we have to say depending on its uncommon empowering condition, and the uncommon empowering condition is, in the case of the I, refers to the sense power, and it is observing a specific focal condition, or the focal object that is the observed condition, which is form, okay, whilst the other one is generated from its uncommon condition, empowering condition, which is mental power, and therefore we have to include these two terms in there, the uncommon empowering condition and the uncommon or the specific focal object condition. Okay, so as we say, we have those that are indicated in this occasion and those that are not indicated in this occasion. Those that are indicated in this occasion obviously are the sense direct perceivers, the mental direct perceivers, and you can include the self-knowers and the yogic direct perceivers because they are discussed in this text. So that means that those that are not indicated in this occasion, actually, as we say, they're not really discussed here, but we just have, for example, it refers to this and this. And the examples that we have is the magical powers, or have the power over emanations, being able to know the minds of others, developing the divine eye, the divine ear, different types, the 5 types of clairvoyance, and so forth. So usually we just have a short sentence that gives a couple of examples and says, etc. So, these are, how are those things developed? They are types of direct perceivers, mental direct perceivers, but they are developed through the power of meditation. Okay, so let's look at one of them, which is the power of emanations. So as we said, this is something that comes through meditation. How do you get this? So first of all, you have to meditate and establish calm abiding. From calm abiding, from the state of calm abiding, you have to establish the actual state of absorption. And once you have the actual state of absorption, you begin meditating, thinking, something which is very big, I will make it very small. Or you train in a different way, the opposite, something which is very small, I will make it very big. Or something which exists, I will make it disappear. I will make it non-existent, or something that does not exist right now, I will make it appear. Okay, so it is because, this is what it means to have emanations, right? You can manipulate the size, the numbers, existing, non-existing things, you make them appear, disappear, and so forth. So you have to train in your meditation to say, okay, I will make it happen. I will make it become big. I will make it become small. Right now, we don't have the capacity to do any of those things. So obviously, there's quite a lot of training. Anyway, Geshe was saying, it's not that I have direct experience of those things, but this is what they say. This is how they describe them. This is how they are. Okay, so actually you can see in all those examples of those amazing things, you need calm abiding first. Wherever you want to go, you need calm abiding. We will discuss it. It's coming. It will have to come. Okay. So Geshe was saying, I would like to conclude the class here. So we have certainly completed the presentation of the sense direct perceivers and the mental direct perceivers. So we have completed the presentation, not the training, not that we know everything there is about them, but the presentation is completed here. And from the next following classes, we will look at the self-knowers and the yogic direct perceivers. Okay, let's mandala and then the dedications.